We've spoken in the first half of Laws of Living about the Orita, the cause law. And I would offer that cause law is not religion as it's been interpreted to be, but that really it's the highest in stress management law. It's the highest understanding of how to heal this energy system that we call a body, and its product that we call a mind, and emotions, and relationships, and life circumstances, and finances. That it's the highest law in understanding how all of those things come about. Without it, you're literally dead. Without an understanding of that cause law, it leads to the degradation of this energy system that we call a body. And unfortunately, the vocabulary of that mnemosa, that orita, or that, the mnemosa, the moral law, the ethical law, or rules, the customs of the people, the language of that, the vocabulary, has become confused with this orita and been degraded by it. And we need to upgrade again the quality of law. Law has nothing to do with man and his legislatures. And oftentimes, unfortunately, because many of the religions were involved in morals, the customs of the people, what we have are illegal religions. Those that are out of harmony with the real law. And I've got a couple of quotes here I'd like to read from Matthew 15:6-9. Here's Jesus talking to those who are engaged in the mnemosa. He says, "Thus you've made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition." What are the traditions? The customs of the people. "You hypocrites, well did Esaias prophesy of you, saying, the people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men." Jesus wasn't talking about theology. He was saying, look, you guys, you're not involved in the cause law, and you're blowing it, and then you're passing it on to others. In fact, you stand in the doorway and prevent others who are sincere and want to get in from getting in by throwing at them your fear and your manipulations, your customs of men. You look at the illegal religions, and what do we have? We have religions, so-called religions. Their whole stress is on guilt and fear, condemnation, instead of the healing messages of the Christ. You listen to this man named Jesus, and he taught people the laws by which you get rid of fear. In fact, when he spoke about it, as he said, perfect love casts out fear. Perfect love in Aramaic, there are two filters in the mind. There's one over intentions and one over perceptions. One's called Rakhma, one's called Khooba. In Aramaic, when those two filters are set, you just eradicated the mind's capacity to produce fear. It's a law by which you keep a mind in harmony with love and truth. It's a law. And so he spoke about this thing called fear, much as in that culture you would speak about it, a demon, and casting it out. And how many do we still see who are promulgating fear in the name of the man who taught how to cast it out? Does it seem like maybe there's a conflict there? You look at how many people today reject religion because of the manipulations, and it's not religion they're rejecting. It's those who are living in the mnemosa, in the ethics and the mores, in the customs and the traditions of men, which are designed to benefit the men who promulgate them. And they have no interest in the law, in the orita, in the cause, because if you give people the recipe for sanity, they will become sane. And if they're sane, they're not controllable. They will become well, they will become healthy, they will be liberated. What did the Master say? Know the truth and the truth will set you free. Now, in the name of a guy who says, know the truth and the truth will set you free, let's keep people in terror of God, this God that Jesus said is named love. Let's keep them in terror of this God coming to get them tomorrow if they happen to do what this man who's promulgating the doctrines of man tells them to do. And it's insane. It's crazy. And you look at how many people have walked away from understanding how life works because of this process, this insane process. You look at those in the area of theologies who've promoted the idea of war. Let's go do a holy war. A holy war, that's an oxymoron. It can't happen. You can't make war in the name of love. It just can't happen. And of course then they use that let's go make war in the name of the man who said, love those who hate you, do good to those who despitefully use you. Didn't they hear? Weren't they listening? They take God out of the heart of man, out of the temple where the Creator is, and put him off in the sky somewhere and make themselves the special representative. And those who would speak of the actual teachings of the man named Jesus who said, it is the Father within me that does the works. Do you not know that you are a temple of the living God? This wasn't theology. Don't you know that you are a system designed to embody love, the Creator? But if you talk about that, you're now some kind of a wacko. Because it doesn't fall along with the party line that keeps people in power. People who are in poverty. It is only the person who is in poverty that has to scam over others to take of their wealth and their power in order to shore up their own weakened selves. It is only the weakened self that will promote in the name of love that's got God is this fearsome, horrible creature. Well, but Michael, you can go back in the Scriptures and read about that. Well, sure you can. But go back in each case where you read about this God that's so difficult and so vengeful. And notice the content of the brain cells of the person who writes about the vengeful God. The quality of person that they are is vengeful. If they don't understand what Jesus said is the first or the prerequisite to reading the law and the prophets, sure, with their vengeance in mind, they're going to read about God and they're going to go, oh, God is vengeful. Just like the guy who looks at the airplane and says, oh, what's the content of his brain cell structure? Bird. It's not a bird at all. It's not a vengeful God at all. But the mind who said vengeful had vengeance in it. And through its brain cells, it understood God and so wrote about. Well, yeah, but Michael, didn't you know that every word in the Scriptures is true? It's the Word of God? Oh, really? Where did you get that? Well, it says it right there in the book. Oh, does it? Did it ever occur to you somebody might have changed it? Oh, no. Nobody would ever change. It even says in the book itself, no one would ever change one jot or tittle. You know what a jot and tittle are? They're the smallest characters in Aramaic. So no one would dare change that. Oh, really? Do you actually believe that? You ever pick up a King James Bible? King James Bible, interestingly enough, by the Founding Fathers was considered government issue. They wouldn't touch it. It was a treasonous document. And if you open it and you look through it, you'll see hundreds, I've never counted them, perhaps thousands of words that are in italics in the King James Version of the Bible. Have you ever wondered why those words are in italics? You know why? They were all added. None of them belong in the original texts, even as they're translated from the Greek. They're all added. And the part that says in Timothy that every word that comes from the Word of God, or that is from the mouth of God, is the Word of God. Every word in the Scriptures. The word is, if you look at it, is in italics. It was added. It doesn't say that every word is from God. The word is isn't there. And when you read it, what you find is, instead of it talking about every word of the Scriptures is from the mouth of God, it says that every word that is from the mouth of God is true. It doesn't say all the words in that book are from the mouth of God. Take out the italicized words when you check on that. It's got a whole different meaning. And so as you look at each description of God that is less than love, and you'll notice this man came who said, I come to add unto the law. I'm going to give you a new level of understanding. God is love. Why did he say that? Because he knew how to hold the condition of love in his mind. And he saw God truly. He knew the law, the first law for studying the law and the prophets and comprehending the Creator. You had to have the condition of love in your mind. And so he changed the definition. And how many people are still wanting to hang out with the vengeful, hateful, spiteful God? But take a close study. In each case where you see a descriptor of God that is less than love, read about the life of the person who's writing it, and you will find the qualities that person has in their lives projected into their brain's image of God, because they did not understand how to study the law and the prophets. They did not understand they had to have the condition of love in their mind first. First law. First order of business. So these illegal religions promote the idea that suffering and deprivation are the keys to life. And suffering and deprivation, I would offer, are not the keys of life. Sometimes we can come away from a situation and we take a message that was never intended. You know, I'd like to tell the story about the Baptist preacher that went into the grade 1 classroom to teach the kids the evils of alcohol. And he goes in and he takes a glass of worms and a bottle of whiskey. And of course the kids are giggling away as he holds up this glass of worms. And he pours the whiskey over the worms. And within a couple of minutes, all the worms are dead, right? And so he holds up this glass of dead worms and says, "Now class, what does that tell you?" Well, Johnny shoots upstairs and says, "Well, that teaches me if I drink alcohol, I don't get worms." That was not exactly the intended message. People saw this man named Jesus who understood the first law. When you think of neighbor, boy, you'd have to have a pretty clear and powerful mind and energy system to be able to hang on a cross and look at this guy who's going to shoot a spear at you and hold a space of love for him. And what happened? The mind that held suffering looked at a suffering Christ and said, life must be about suffering. The way to God must be through suffering. Wrong message, folks. Wasn't the message at all. What he did was, he stood the worst test you could stand for. And he stood as a space of love. He followed the first law when he looked down at each of those who were killing him. And he held a space of love in him. Now, people have said, "Well, Michael, haven't you noticed that got him killed?" It's like, well, yes, I noticed that got him killed. Have you noticed they couldn't keep him that way? That was the message. He said, "Watch, folks, I'm going to stand for the worst you can think of, and I'm going to stand as a space of love and watch how I come out on the other side." It wasn't about suffering. It was about demonstrating what he'd been talking about. And he came out the other side just fine. You know, and we're told in the Greek language that in the last moments, and it's interesting, you know, there are those who will say, the scriptures were all written in Greek. But then when you hear the quote that he said while hanging from the cross, they say, it's left in the original Aramaic. Wait a minute, if it's all done in Greek, why is this statement left in the original Aramaic? Because the Aramaic was the original. But it had been done away with. In the 6th century, a bishop named Rabula eradicated Jesus and law and turned it into religion. They burned every Aramaic Bible they could find in the 6th century. They rounded them up and got rid of them. Because that language is a language, it is a culture that can speak of higher states of being that no other language on the planet is capable of. It is the root language of 5 of the world's major religions. There's a reason for that. It's able to address issues that no other language is capable of addressing directly. And so when you go back and you start to understand in context, well, why was it left in the original Aramaic? That quote that he said at the last moment on the cross, it was left in the original Aramaic because it was all originally Aramaic. It wasn't Greek. This man spoke a cultural and a culturally significant language called Aramaic, and his teachings have meaning in Aramaic. I wish we could start to comprehend what we don't know from the Aramaic yet. And good Aramaic work is very difficult to find because it was eradicated so long ago. And in the up until World War I, They thought that the Aramaic was a dead language. And then they found pockets in the northern Kurdistan mountains where people were speaking Aramaic much as they were 2,000 years ago. And there were some family Bibles that survived, and there are bits and pieces and blotches of work that come from that. And by and large, those minds have been filled with the world. And to get back to that original understanding, what did Jesus say when at the last moment he's getting ready to die? Did he say, as those who would teach the commandments of men and keep people in suffering, did he say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? With dejection and grief and pain, as we've been told he did? Well, interestingly enough, the word rejected, forsaken, thrown away is almost the same word in Aramaic as set aside for a special purpose. He didn't say, first of all, my God, my God. In Aramaic, what he said was a much more intimate greeting. It was, my Father, my Father. And it wasn't said with dejection, it was said with excitement. He got his final insight and understanding at that moment. And that was, I will stand as the space of love I'm committed to being, and I will come out the other side, and in 3 days I will rebuild my body exactly as you told me I could. I got it. I understand it. Wow, this is what you set me aside for. Not threw me away, but I understand. To be held up to learn and to teach this lesson, to stand as a space of love, is the gateway to eternal life. I got it. It was excitement. It wasn't dejection. It was the understanding. I think it was his final comprehension of bringing the power of bringing love through every cell in your being, regardless of circumstance in your life. It was his final and cellular comprehension of living the first law. And its impact was eternal life. And if you know that truth, the truth will set you free. Do you suppose those who teach the commandments of men really want you to be free? You think there's much money or power in it? It's not much. Not much. It's time for us to wake up and understand what that was about. This law, this Orita, is about us comprehending how we operate, what energies belong in the system and what energies don't. If you look into this law, and how do you tell if something is a law? You can tell that it's a law if you look at it and then you see the result that's produced if it's not followed. And where you see someone engaging in that behavior and producing the result that was spoken about, you know it's a law. And there were laws for how to handle your money. For instance, it says, thou shalt have no unjust weights or measures in your bag. Do you know what that means? Do you have any comprehension what that means? You know what this is? What is this? Anybody know? $10 bill. You mean it's $10? Do you know what a dollar is? A dollar is 377 grains of silver. You know what this is? It's a worthless piece of paper. If you read it, it says it's a note. What's a note? A note is evidence of a debt. This is called unjust weights and measures. The law says if you carry those in your bags, you're a thief. And the penalty for a thief is the thief has his property taken away. Now you start looking at the effect of that, and you'll see that the law is unfolding in our lives. You'll notice there's no private property left in America. Nobody owns property in America. Oh, well, I do. Oh, really? Do you really? Let's apply the test as to whether or not you own it. The first test of whether or not you own a piece of property is, who gets to say what you do with it? If you decide that you want to go do whatever you want to do on your property, can you just go and do it? Or will the owner come and cart you off to jail if he doesn't like it? You better believe he will. What happens if you don't pay your rent? Oh, I don't have any rent to pay. Oh, well, okay. Let's do a little doublespeak. Let's change the name. Let's change the word. Let's call it taxes. What happens if you don't pay your rent? They come and take your property away because it's not owned. People who own property don't pay rent on it or taxes on it. Start looking into the effect of the law, and you find there are rules there. Don't carry unjust weights or measures in your bag, or you've broken the law. There are rules for how to handle your land. There are ways to deal with crops and how to rotate crops. And if you don't, you will destroy your land. And so what do we have today? We have such a plethora of degenerative diseases. And one of the major reasons for that is because we have moved more and more in the direction of violating the land laws and grown food with less and less nutrition in it. And we eat food and we starve to death. That's what comes from violating the land laws. There are laws on how to handle your genitals. There are laws on how to handle your inheritance. There are laws on how to handle your family. And they say, oh yeah, but there's so many laws and it's so complex. Who could ever understand those laws? Well, you know, in this country we've got in excess of 1 million laws on the books. There are only 756 statutes in the whole body of the law, the scriptures. 756. We have over 1 million. Where's the complexity lie? When we start to comprehend, when we've got the eyes to see and the ears to hear, it will all start to make sense. You've got to treat your land properly before it will grow nutritious food. You can't fill it with chemicals and expect it to grow food. When you put chemical fertilizers on the soil, it binds nutrients to the soil, and the nutrients don't go into the food. You now have nutrition-free food. There are laws. There are energies that belong in the system and energies that don't. And it's not a condemning God that punishes us if we break the law. Because you know why? Because you can't break the law. It's not possible to break the law. Now, you can break man's rules and regulations, but you can't break a law. When it comes to the laws of living, you collide with the law, you get broken, the law doesn't sustain the least fracture. The law carries on just fine. You suffer in effect. And there isn't some punishing God. You know, there's a law called the law of gravity. Law of gravity says, you know, feet always go the same way. It's a very reliable law. It's a good thing it's a reliable law. Life would be rather awkward if you got up from your seat when this workshop's over, and instead of your feet going down, they went up. Things would become very difficult. Driving your car would get very awkward. It's nice to have laws you can rely on. And the laws don't change. And when you come into avoidable collision with the laws, you get hurt. So we have the law of gravity. Now, do you think if we have a 2,000-foot cliff, there's this punishing, stern, horrific God that stands around and says, well, let's see now. I'm the God of cliffs, and if you step over, I'll decide whether or not I'm going to break your bones at the bottom. No. It's a law that says gravity works. And if you fall off the cliff, when you get to the bottom, bones break. When they said God is no respecter of persons, that's what they were talking about. This isn't selective application and supplication in special circumstance. There's things that work in the system and things that don't. Sin is an archery term, and sin means off the mark or off the target. It doesn't mean something terrible and awful that you've done. It's an archery term. When you fire to the target and you miss the target, the scorekeeper yelled, sin, you're off the mark. You missed the target. Take another shot. So there's no great God of anything. You know, we have a young man and we give him a new car and he's never driven before. And he goes to the gas station to fill the car up and he's never been in a gas station before. And he reaches for the water hose and fills the gas tank. Do you think there's some great God of gas tanks that says, I think we'll punish this one. I'm not going to let that car run ever again. No. Water doesn't belong in gas tanks. It just doesn't work. There are energies that belong in this human system and energies that don't. And the ones that don't work. There's no punishing God required. Nothing to do with it. It's just, folks, this is how the energy system works. And you look at how many people want to become their own lawmakers. I'll do whatever I want. I want to be free. Oh, excuse me, folks, but there's no such thing as freedom. You are not free. You never will be free. It's not possible to be free. You can have liberty. You know, one of the things if you listen to Karl Marx said, how do you destroy a society? He said, you change the meaning of their words. You'll notice we don't have a freedom bell in America. We have a liberty bell. Liberty has the constraint of law. It's understood under liberty you are constrained by laws. You are not free to do whatever you want. But you look at how many people want to do behaviors that are destructive to the system. That would be like the kid who puts the water in his gas tank and the car won't run. He turns to the government and says, look, government, I want you to find a solution for this. I want to be able to run my car on water. You spend money, and I'm going to force you to spend money to fix this problem. It's like, son, water doesn't work in gas tanks. It's just part of the way the energy system works. If you engage in behaviors that are disintegrative to your energy system is going to disintegrate. That's just the way the law works. It isn't about some moralistic game. It's about understanding what supports and enlivens this energy system. Man plays out the game with fear. We now have law enforcement. What's law enforcement look like? Well, you got this guy with a big piece of iron on his hip that almost stands like, make my day. And so what have you got? You've got intimidation and fear. That's the tradition of man, not the tradition of God. And so what happens to the mind in fear? The mind that's in fear, the law of the mind says that when you are in fear, you will block information. You ever watch an attorney with an opposing witness? What's the first thing he wants to do? Get the opposing witness into fear or anger. Because when the mind goes into fear or anger, it blocks information and it loses intelligence. Remember when we started the workshop? We're kind of coming full circle. Remember we started the workshop and I said, how many have ever done something you regret having done? Everybody. What were all the answers when I asked what you were feeling? They were some form of fear or hostility. Every one of those answers. Because when fear or hostility operate in the mind, there's a blockage of information. And so what does man do? Well, let's just use more fear and then maybe they'll obey the law. Let's punish more and then maybe it'll work. Everything that happens has a recipe. If we teach children the recipe for insanity, we can't pass enough laws to stop them from doing insane things. We've got to teach children the recipe for sanity. Anybody here ever do any baking? Anybody here a baker? Okay, we have a baker here. Now, I would like you to teach me cake. Could you do that, please?
Are you talking to me?
Yes. Would you teach me cake? You're a baker.
I'm not a baker. I have baked.
Okay, you have baked. So let's imagine that one of the things that you've baked is cakes. Could you teach me cake, please?
Could I teach you cake?
Yeah, teach me cake.
Well, I go to the grocery store and get a package of mix.
Well, wait a minute. Now, you sound like you're about to give me a recipe. I don't want a recipe. I just want you to teach me cake. You can't teach me cake, can you?
No.
You can give me a recipe.
I might not even be able to teach you a recipe.
Okay, well, if you can't teach me the recipe, let's imagine you're the baker. What you've got to do, though, if you're going to teach me how to bake a cake, is you're going to have to give me the recipe for how to produce the result. We're teaching children through fear and intimidation, trying to produce a result of sanity. And it doesn't work. Well, I know what we'll do when one of these shootings happen. We'll get more men with big guns on their hips, and we'll station them at the doors, and we'll put metal detectors in, and we'll just intimidate the hell out of these kids. Well, you just taught them the recipe for insanity. These kids are going to get more and more insane. You watch and mark my words. That's the recipe. If you can't teach them the law, the recipe for producing sanity, you're not going to get sane kids. It's not going to happen. And you watch the way some of these kids are brutalized in these schools, emotionally and verbally. And it's insane. And then when they respond to it, and it almost is getting to the point where the teacher can almost prescribe the drug to shut them down. Hey, just put them in a chemical straitjacket and they won't be a problem anymore. Well, I'd offer it's not the kids that are the problem. We need to start to learn and teach the children the recipe for living a sane life, from the first law on down. And until we do, our kids aren't going to produce the result that we want them to. So teaching them to fear isn't going to work. That's the law of man. What do you need to teach them? You need to teach them to love the truth. You see, if you teach someone to love truth, instead of the mind going into blockage, which it does with fear and anger, the mind now gives more information and more comprehension and more understanding. Most human beings live in blockage of truth. They can't see what it is that they're about and what it is that they're doing. Because once the mind goes into fear, it shuts down information. The highest thing we can teach that mind, well, two things we can teach it is how to forgive and how to love truth. And as it loves truth, the mind will be given permission to show more and more and more of what it is that needs to be healed. Because love of truth produces attention that focuses the mind on accepting inputs and correcting its blockages. And it moves from protective action to creative action. There's some interesting work being done in cell biology, and in the laboratories in cell biology, they're discovering that cells have two modes of function. They have a creative mode and they have a protective mode. And the cell can only function in one mode at a time. It cannot do both at the same time. And if the cell is told or gets the message from its environment that there's danger afoot, the cell goes into protection mode. There's some interesting material coming out of brain bio research, National Institute of Health. A woman named Candace Pert tells us that, and was the head of that department, tells us that every thought we think produces a molecule. The molecule is called a neuropeptide. The neuropeptide circulates throughout the structure, and there are receptor sites on each cell for those neuropeptides. So your mind, your thoughts are continuously communicating to every cell in your body exactly what is going on in the environment. And if the quality of the molecule is of fear, of hostility, then the cell gets the message, we're in a dangerous place, we need to shut down. The cell they're showing in the laboratory, this neuropeptide that lands on the cell, the cell replicates that message inside of itself. And it goes into protection mode. Now, a cell can only last so long in protection mode. And what they're proving in the laboratory is if the cell gets the message from its physical environment that everything is A-OK, but the mind says there's a problem and there's something to fear, that the cell will always listen to the mind first. And it will move to protect mode. Now, protect mode would be very much like, let's say this city. We get a message, today, for the last months, whatever, the city has rolled along, worked well, the garbage trucks run, and the water system operates, and the sewage system operates, and there's electricity, and the stores are going, and the businesses are running. But let's imagine, cancel the image, that we got a message tonight that the city was going to be bombed tomorrow. What would happen? Well, the city would go into protect mode. The workers that run the sewage system wouldn't show up for work. The workers that run the grocery store wouldn't show up for work. The businesses wouldn't open. The electricity wouldn't run for long. We'd go into protect mode. Now, if that happened for a day, it'd be, well, okay, so what? Now we're back to business as usual. We go from protect mode back to creative mode. Everything's fine. But what happens if we're told, well, actually it was a mistake. The bomb isn't going to be dropped till the next day. And then the next day, the next day, the next day. 6 months later, what has happened? Well, probably 50, 70% of the population has died. They ran out of water. They ran out of food. The grocery stores weren't operating. The trucks weren't delivering. The sewage backed up. The rats are infested. The garbage isn't being hauled away. The wastes aren't being removed. In protect mode, death happens. Now, it's no different in the city than it is in our cellular structure. And if we're continuously feeding to our minds this fear, this intimidation, then our cellular structure goes into a mode at which it can't operate for very long. The law of love must be taught, especially to the children. You look at these kids. Julie, that I talked about earlier, wrote that book on Could This Child Really Be Mine? Working with the children. She's seeing kids at kindergarten level that are threatening to kill each other. Kids 5 years of age threatening to kill each other. Now, they're brought up in a world where the speech is that of hostility. They're brought up in a world where the speech is that of fear. And oftentimes they go into the educational institutions to just have that promulgated even further. You listen to the demeaning, degrading way that teachers often speak to children. Now, this isn't every teacher. I mean, there are so many teachers out there that are so loving and so genuine and want to support kids. But there are so many of them that because of their own fears and their own hostilities and their own unresolved issues, can't do that with children. Especially because many of their issues come from when they were children. And so the children simply resonate those hostilities and fears in them. And then, not understanding the first law of operation, if you can't pass that law of love in front of those children, you shouldn't be in that classroom. That's the first piece of training that should happen for a teacher to go into a classroom. It should not be, I mean, thanks, but I wouldn't put my child in front of them. Because the child's going to take on the brain cells. Train a child up in the way it will go. The child's going to take on the realities of that superior. And the speech is such a major key to the process. Speech is such a big piece of the puzzle and the laws by which it operates. Where do we find a personal code that is adequate to life today? How do you come up with that? Well, let me quote a couple of quotes. Jeremiah 31, 33, and 34 says this: I will put my law in their inward parts. I will write it in their hearts and will be their God, and they shall be my people. What does that mean? I will be their God. Is this some kind of religious stuff? No. God says, I put a resonant frequency within you, and if you live out of that, we're going to be in tune with each other. And life is going to go wrong just fine. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, said the Lord. And I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. What does that mean? That means that when we get into harmony with love, whatever is in us that is of a disintegrative nature that we have asked the Father within to bring to us will be released and liberated. We're not going to have to play it out anymore. But we've got to get into resonance with that. Matthew 5 in the Beatitudes. And in our workshop, Empowered to Heal, we go much deeper into the Beatitudes. But I want to just key in and focus on one word in the Beatitudes. And that's the word that we're told says, Blessed are they. And in that word, Blessed are they, we don't find any semblance of that word in the Aramaic Beatitudes from Matthew 5. They're just not there. We're told repeatedly, it says, Blessed are they, blessed are they. Those words aren't there. In Aramaic, the word is tuvehun. And tuvehun, translated from the Aramaic, says this. It's a three-part word. Each of the Beatitudes starts with this three-part word. And what, in essence, each Beatitude is preceded with is a latent neural structure. Remember in Jeremiah, I will write my law in their inward parts? The neural structure is in you already, folks. A latent neural structure implanted by God to guide you. This is what Jesus was saying when he said the Beatitudes. A latent neural structure implanted by God to guide you to happiness and well-being will become your conscious possession, you who, and then each of the Beatitudes is a set of instructions on how to access that. The lawful process by which you access the attitude of mind that was implanted in you by God. The guidance system that will take you to a happy, healthy, fulfilling life. In other words, your personal code will be in harmony with the law. Instead of coming from the insanities of the world, you will, as you do your work, shift and change your personal code until it all falls into harmony with the law. And then it will naturally move into a joyful, fulfilling life. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 2:12 and up to 3:3. And let's look at this let's extract religious meanings. And let's look at this from an energy systems perspective and from a perspective of, here's the physics of how life works. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God. Now, the Spirit of God in Aramaic was called Ruach. The laws flow from that force. The result of that force is the law. Men would have you believe that laws flow from authority. In fact, if you look at some of the dictionaries, they'll tell you that it is the rule of a superior. It's the rule of the guy with the bigger gun. And that's the recipe for insanity when you follow that rule. Law is not the rule of an authority. Law flows from the eternal forces from God. This is what Jesus was comprehending and understanding. So now we receive not the spirit of the world, in other words, not the insanity of authority, but the Spirit which is of God. But the natural man, that is the man that's been trained, has in his brain cells that which the world has taught, the natural man receives not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him. Neither can he know them because they are spiritually discerned. We've got to awaken. The first beatitude, we're told, says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Doesn't say that at all. What it says is a latent neural structure implanted by God to guide you to happiness and well-being becomes your conscious possession. You who have a home in Ruach, in the eternal forces from God. That's your home. That's where you live, in your spiritual nature. This wasn't about theology. So they are spiritually discerned. You can't spiritually discern things until you go into your spiritual body. And then he says, but we have the mind of Christ. What mind did Christ have? The mind of God. Jesus opened a gateway, a pathway for, here's how you play in the mind of God rather than the mind of man. And that your life will be transformed as you renew your mind. And then 3:1 says, and I, brethren, could not speak unto you as unto spiritual, but as unto carnal, even as to babes in Christ. What does that mean? That means that if all we have in brain cells is that which has been taught to us in the world, then our Adam body, which is Adamos, the red clay, or carnal. Not that there's anything wrong with carnal, but that what's been trained into brain cells is all this person can hear. What can our friend who looks at the airplane hear about airplanes the first time you tell him? If he's been trained in the ways of the jungle and knows nothing of international travel, you can't tell him about that. So you'd say he is a babe in the realm of airplanes. You couldn't just say, well, you see what happens is we fuel this thing up, we start the engines, there's a pilot in there, and he's going to fly 3,000 miles. He's a babe in regard to that conversation. He can't hear a word of it. It makes no sense whatsoever. So here's what Paul's saying in that case. Is I couldn't speak to you about the spiritual because you're babes in that realm. I have fed you with milk, not meat. In other words, strength to strength. Precept to precept. You gather the information. You know, we were here last year and we did some of these principles we talked about. How many this year is it making a whole other level of sense now that the brain cells are built? It's like, oh, that's what it meant. For hitherto you were not able to bear it. And listen to this, he says, and neither are you able now. In other words, you still don't have enough brain cells built to hear it, he was telling them. And so they're still speaking to the carnal mind because the spiritual mind has not yet awakened. The mind of Christ in them is not awakened. And it's not about religion. 1 Peter 4:1 says, arm yourselves. Christ, arm yourselves likewise with the same mind. Again, speaking about having the mind of Christ. How do you tell whether you're in that carnal or not? For ye are yet carnal, for whereas there is among you envying and strife and divisions, are you not carnal and walk as men? In other words, if you're still living out of what the world has taught you. It wasn't some kind of a put down, it was just, hey folks, you've got to love truth. You've got to be honest enough to be able to look at where you are. We do a workshop called the Circle of Life and how to play it. In fact, we did it when we were here last year. the circle of life and how to play it. And it shows you where you are in your walk. And if you're in blockage of truth about it, it allows the space to open to be able to see what's really going on. Galatians 4:19 says, until Christ be formed in you. They weren't talking about a man named Jesus. They were talking about the mind of God being formed and strengthened so much that the human mind couldn't take it over anymore. And it's a dual process. One part of the process is the process of forgiveness, undoing the content of brain cells, of the insanity, of the hatreds, the fears, etc. And then the other part is strengthening and creating a discipline and a practice out of focusing into the mind of God. There's an interesting thing that happened during the Korean War. In the prison camps, the concentration camps, there were 7,000 American soldiers captured and placed. And in the same camps, there were 229 Turks. When they were finally liberated from those camps, out of 7,000 American soldiers, 5,000 of them had either gone insane, had gone criminal, or died. 5,000 out of 7,000 American soldiers. When they liberated the camps, 229 Turks went home alive and well. Only 2,000 out of 5,000 Americans and 229 Turks. That's interesting. So there was an army psychiatrist. Let's see, I think I've got his name here. What was his name? No, I guess I don't. Oh, yes. Major William E. Meyer, U.S. Army Medical Corps, was a psychiatrist. He thought that was pretty interesting. So he decided to check it out. What's going on? What happened? And you know what he found? He found that 2,229 out of 7,229 men had one thing in common. One thing. Every one of them prayed every day. Every one of them went to the mind of God every day and spent time there. And when they went to the mind of God, that mind being formed in them, their minds were not available for the brainwashing that drove the others to such stress that they died, that they went criminal, or they went insane. Major Meyer thought that was interesting, so he went out on the road to teach and to lecture and to let people in America know what he'd found out. And you know what happened? They forced him to stop. Headquarters said, shut up. You're not talking about this anymore. And it was just a matter of a couple of years, and prayer was illegal in the schools of America. Time for us to wake up to the law. If you don't spend daily time in cultivating your connection and relationship with the forces from God, your home in Ruka, and your connection to love, you can't have a sane mind. You can't live in a sane manner. And so we want to start to recognize that these laws are key, and our words are a major part of it. Karl Marx says, you want to take over a culture, you destroy its you destroy the meaning of its words. 1943, Rose Wilder Lane. I think she was the mother of the woman that wrote Little House on the Prairie. Mother or daughter, maybe. Rose Wilder Lane wrote this: the vocabulary in America. This is 1943. When was it Karl Marx wrote his work? Change the meaning of words, and you can take over a culture. She says the vocabulary in America is so confused, it is a threat to the whole world. Human beings are the only creature that's born with a brain that has lobes where one is heavier than the other. There's a speech center in the brain of the human being, usually in the right lobe. No other creature has that. And that speech center is a key to what will build that being's personal code. The words it hears will build its code when those words are experienced to reduce stress, when those words are experienced with emotion, when those words are repeated within that being. It's how behavior-driving realities are built. Words, a major key for human beings. let's imagine the first day that you got behind the wheel of a car. How many, the first day you got behind the wheel of a car, had the key in your hand, you had a CD, you went and jumped in the car, you popped the CD in, selected the song you wanted to listen to, started the car, popped in reverse, drove back down the driveway, and drove away? How many did that the first time you got behind the wheel of a car? No hands. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why. Well, because you did not have a behavior driving reality in your mind about driving a car. You had to build one. So what happened? Well, you got into the car and somebody said, you put the key in the ignition. And you turn the key, but before you turn the key, you put your foot on the clutch. And you give it a little bit of gas. And you make sure the parking brake's set, because we're on a hill. And you turn the key, you give it a little gas, and you start it, and you get it going. You let it warm up a little bit. And then you get familiar with the shift. Now, the shift is in an H pattern. Reverse is down here. You push it down, and it's to the right. First gear is up here. Second gear, straight back. Third gear, fourth gear. And now, so you want to put it in reverse. You push it down, push it over and back. Okay? And now you look in the rearview mirror. You look in your side view mirrors. Then you turn your head and you make sure nothing's behind you. And now you apply a little bit of gas, and you let the clutch out slowly, slowly. Oh, stall. Oh, wait a minute. Put your foot down back on the clutch. Start the engine again. Okay, now give it just a little more gas, smoothly, that's it. And you back down the driveway, watching where you're going. You pull out of the street. Now, what do you do? Well, let's see. I'm in reverse. H pattern is down. First is I take it out and put it up. And so somebody talked you through that, right? And then what happened? Well, when somebody wasn't there to talk you through it, after you'd had enough lessons that you remembered how to do it, what did you do? You got in the car and you said to yourself, well, let's see now. I put my key in the ignition, I turned the key, put my foot on the clutch, gas, H pattern, put it in reverse, look in the mirrors, turn around, give it a little bit of gas, let the clutch out slowly, roll it back down the street, first, H pattern, put it in first, and off I go. So you did that. You said it very likely to yourself out loud. Then, now you had friends in the car, right? You were driving on your own. What did you do? It was silent. You said it silently to yourself inside your head. Okay, car, ignition, gas, clutch, H pattern, back down the driveway, and off you went. And now you don't say a word, right? You get in the car, you pop your CD in, you select it, and you drive away. But you know something? That whole process happens in your mind every time you get in the car. But it's now an unconscious process. It is governed by your regulatory speech system. You trained your mind how to do that behavior through the use of words. Once you recognize that you trained your mind how to do that behavior through the use of words, then you start to see, how many said that you'd done something that you now regret doing? Guess how you got that behavior in? Words. And in the same way that the whole process of driving the car is now an unconscious process, when somebody gives you the look, an unconscious process takes over and drives your behavior. There are words that are harmonious with law, and there are words that are out of harmony with law. And until you recognize that there are words that are in harmony and words that are out of harmony with law, you might find yourself using the wrong words. And if you use the wrong words, you won't be able to regulate your behavior properly. If you listen to the words that the kids are using today, the words are consistent with the behaviors that they're engaging in. Right? As your behavior is consistent with the words that you've engaged in. And so when you recognize that, you start to see how important your words are to you. Let's look at what the law says about that and how this fits with the personal code. You can't do a behavior that you haven't had spoken into your system. Remember how many have raised kids? And observe this process of speech governing behavior. Remember when your child was maybe 4 or 5, and they didn't realize that after hearing things, they spoke them out loud. And so Johnny walked through the room saying to himself as he walked past Mom, I'm going to go grab a cookie. And then Johnny was just flabbergasted when Mom showed up and caught him with his hand in the cookie jar. He realized he was speaking those words out loud. So Johnny got smart and the words went to silent speech. It's only as we hear words in our external environment, then they become our speech, then they become our silent speech, then they become our unconscious speech, that they regulate our behavior. Now let's go listen to what the law has to say. I've got some quotes I'd like to read. And these are the things, in order to reach a result, harmony in life, you've got to have the recipe. Here's the recipe. First law is the key to the recipe. Here's where it speaks about how the personal code is developed. Matthew 12:37. For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned. You notice it isn't by God you're going to be condemned? It's your words. Because your words are your instruction to the Father within who does the works. You watch, the person who says, I can't stand this, is the person who ends up with feet and leg problems. The person who says, I can't stomach this, is the person who ends up with digestive problems. The person who says, that's a pain in the neck, is the person who ends up with neck problems. By your words, your energy system is regulated, governed, and your behavior is regulated. I hate that. There's the person who has a problem with hatred. By your words. You've got to pay attention to your words. Listen to the Old Testament. My words fly up, my thoughts remain below. In other words, I'm in denial. But if you start to watch your words, they will tell you what it is that you need to look at. Matthew 12:36. But I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak. You start pointing out to people what they've said, and they go, oh, well, I didn't mean that. Every idle word that men speak, they shall give account thereof on the day of judgment. And you know something? The day of judgment's at hand. Today's it. Tomorrow will be the day of judgment, and the next day it will be. And if your words are about love and life and aliveness and joy and health, then the day of judgment will bring you love and life and aliveness and joy and health, because the Creator's got no choice but to bring you what you ask for. And if your words are about degradation and hatred and fear and intimidation and condemnation and grief and gossip and slander, you get the original, they get the carbon copy. And it literally, those molecules that are formed go into your cellular structure, and your cells replicate those molecules inside themselves, and in your physiology, you get to live with the chemistry of your words. Be careful. This guy knew what he was talking about how it works. And then he said, the words that I speak unto you, they are the spirit and they are the life. This, I would offer, is the law. This is the sum and substance of the law and the recipe for sanity, for aliveness, for joy, for creativity, for living the life that you are designed to live in relationship with love as a being made of love. And I join you in that state of being.